Good morning, everybody, and welcome to this morning's webinar. Today, we're going to be looking at how you can plan staffing levels for holiday periods or at any time. If you wouldn't mind remaining muted during the session, and if you can ask any questions on the meeting chat, and then I'll answer those questions at the end for you. The webinar is being recorded and will be available on our training pages once it's been edited, and it will also be available on our YouTube channel where you can subscribe and then receive notifications whenever a new video is uploaded. If there are any questions that we're not able to answer during the session, there will be a frequently asked questions and we will send those out via email at the end of the session for you. So today we're going to be looking at accessing the reports console, because within there we'll have various reports that we can use to see how the team is performing within the practice. We'll look at the call reports, we'll look at the group reports so that we can see how the individual teams are performing, and then we'll also look at how you can add members into the groups and manage those groups through the service delivery console. There's a couple of options then when it comes to getting extra people into the teams during the holiday period. So we'll look at auto step in and also the manual group management through the user console. So first of all, we're going to have a look at accessing that reports console so that we can see the reports that are going to show us how the practice is performing with all the calls there. Now, the reports console can either be accessed via your single sign-on window, and when you log in, it will be the middle one at the top, and that will then take you through to the reports console. If you're already logged into one of the consoles, you can use the menu at the top right-hand side, just next to your initials. And when you click on the menu, you'll then have options to all of the other menus all of the other consoles and portals available for your user profile. Clicking on one of the links in the menus or via the box on the single sign-on will then open up a new tab in your browser, and that will then take you to the reporting menu. So on the left-hand side, there is normally a list of menus there with user, group, and call reports. You might find that this menu is condensed, so there will be a little arrow just up at the top where you can then expand that menu so that you can see the reports. And each time you click on one of the reports, it will then bring the report up onto the screen so that you can set the parameters. And these reports can be run at any time. Some of them even include real-time data. So for things like the user status overview, it will actually show you as that user is changing their status on the screen if you need to see that. You can click on the star just next to the report. So if it's a report that's got particularly useful information that you'll want to run again, clicking on the star will add it to your favourites up at the top of the list. So that will then make it quick and easy for you to be able to access the reports that have given you the information that you want to see. Once the reports, you've selected the report, there is also an arrow to condense the menu. So if you want more room on the screen to see that report, then you can remove the menu from the left-hand side just by clicking on the arrow at the top there. We're going to have a look at some of the reports now that you can see within the reports console. So here we have an example of an inbound call performance report. Now this can be run on any of the numbers within the practice. So I've run it on our main number here for our training database. So the number of calls won't be very high because obviously it's when we're delivering training and we're actually calling in through the main number that we've got set up for our training practice. You can change the parameters of most of the reports. So I've looked for a report on this inbound call performance report that's going to show me how many calls have been answered within 1 minute. Now you can change that so that you could see, how many calls are answered within 5 minutes within the practice, and then you can adjust your staffing levels to make sure that those are within what you would accept within the practice. I've got this report showing by hour. You can also have it as a daily report, and it's over a month period here for the period of February last year. You'll be able to get report data back over the 3-year period that you've been with us, so there'll be no problems there getting the reports going further back there from when you started with Surgery Connect. Once you've filled in the parameters, you'll then need to click on Generate Report, and that will then show the report on the screen for you. And we can see here that this is showing me the calls that have been answered within 1 minute and the percentage of those calls that came through that were answered. It will also tell me the missed calls within 1 minute, and missed calls are obviously calls then that weren't answered within that time period on this particular report. You've then got the answered outside 1 minute and missed outside 1 minute, and then the total calls at the end here per hour. So running this for a practice, you'd be able to see then the peaks of the calls coming in and how quickly those calls are answered at that particular time of day. Our inbound call stats report will show you the busy periods within the practice, both in a graph and in a table format here. Again, you can change the parameters across the top. So I'm looking at this one again for our main number on the training database, and it's looking at calls for each hour. This one's been run for a week's period, so between the 15th and 19th of February last year. And again, when you generate the report, it will then show the details on the screen. So you can then see here by looking down at the times on the left-hand side where the busy periods were for our particular calls. Now, obviously, in a practice, we'd expect there to be a lot of calls between the 8 and the 9 period. It will also tell you the average call duration for each of those calls, so how long the calls are taking to be dealt with, and then the total number of calls and the average call duration will then give you the total call duration there. It will also tell you how many calls you have ongoing at the same time within this particular table. This is an inbound number overview report, and this will show you the calls that are coming into the various numbers within the practice. This is also quite useful if you have numbers on your system that are unassigned and don't have call flows to tell the system what to do with an inbound call. Again, this has been run for a month's period, and it's got the numbers for our particular practice. So we have our main number here. We've got one of our direct dial numbers and also the direct dial here for Ian. And then this number that's just showing as a number is an unassigned number in our numbers section in the service delivery console. And that means there's no call flow for that number. So when somebody uses that number, those calls aren't going anywhere. We can see that on that particular number, we've had one inbound call. It wasn't answered because there's no call flow to direct it into the practice. So that was then an abandoned call. Abandoned calls on Surgery Connect are calls that have dropped before joining a queue. So you'll quite often see a lot of abandoned calls just before the practice opens in the morning, where patients are trying to dial in and be the first person in the queue when the phone lines open there. It will also include any calls that have dropped out before they've joined a queue if the practice is open. A missed call on Surgery Connect is a call that's dropped when it was in a queue. So they've made their selection, they're queuing for the team that's going to answer those calls, and then they've dropped out of that particular queue. It may be that you're actually encouraging missed calls because you're giving the patient information whilst they're queuing. So through our playlist feature on Surgery Connect, you can interrupt the queue position and music notification to give the patient extra information about where they can, for example, book appointments, or to give them extra information around prescription queries. If that's the case, you want to see missed calls because they'll have heard the information, and rather than them waiting to speak to somebody in the practice, they're actually dropping out of the queue. So you can use that playlist facility to give the patients the information that the reception team are having to give out frequently there. On this number report, we would know that if we're getting multiple calls in on this number, we'd need to set up a call flow so that we can then get those calls answered within the practice. And then within the table for the numbers that are in use, it will show you how many inbound calls you've had and how many of those calls were actually answered and what percentage that is of the total inbound calls. It will also show you the number of calls missed on here, as well as the number of calls abandoned. There are also group reports. So if you've got groups set up on the system, you can check what the group performance is. This is a group overview report, again, generated on our training database and between the 1st and 28th of February last year. When you generate the report, again, this will have a graph and also a table. All of these reports can be exported into a spreadsheet. So obviously you can keep the data rather than having to rerun them. If you want to export the data, and then you can save that into a spreadsheet, and you'll be able to see the call patterns as you go through the year there. Within this report, it's then got details for each of the groups that we have within the practice. So we can see the group name down the left-hand side, and then how many calls were queuing for that group and how many calls were answered from those queues. So the main team here answering calls is our patient care team. They had 9,061 calls coming in and answered 7,511 of them. You can see when they were missed from the queue and how long the longest queue duration was as well on an answered or a missed call. So this bit here is showing us that the calls were answered in the longest time to queue was 1 hour and 14 seconds, whereas if the patients were dropping out of the queue, they were waiting for 42 minutes at the most to get that call answered. It will also give you some average queue duration time, so you can see how long it normally takes to queue through that particular group. The totals at the bottom of the screen will actually give you the figures that the NHS are asking for as well. So this would then give you your average queue duration times for that questionnaire that's coming out from the NHS. This is a group overview report, and this is showing us similar information to the group overview, but this is an hourly overview report. I'm just looking at the patient care team, as those are the team that answer the calls. And on this report, you can see then on an hour by hour basis how many calls are going through to that particular team, which will help you determine how many staff members you need. So if you've got the holiday periods coming up and you know that you're going to have people off on leave, you can start looking at how many people you need to cover within that particular team. It will also show you hour by hour on this report how many of those calls were answered and the percentages, as well as the missed calls and the longest queue durations and the average call durations as well. So this average call duration will give you a good idea of how long a call normally takes to be dealt with within the practice. This is a patient callback report. So you can run this report if you have a patient callback activated on your queues, and it will then show you how many of the calls that were queuing then requested patient callback. It will also show you how many callbacks were made successfully to the patients and how many were rejected when we called them, or how many didn't make it to the end of the queue there, or we had to reset at the end of the day. The times at the end will show you how much time they spent in the virtual queue. So that's while they're queuing for the callback on patient callback. And obviously that's a total for all of the calls within that callback queue. But you do have the average times here as well. So that will then break it down per call for you. So we've got a 9-minute average time between 8 and 9 and a 16-minute average time, waiting time there in the virtual queue between 9 and 10. We've also got a queue duration analysis, so you can see how long calls are queuing on average within the individual groups. So now I've set this one for all groups on our training database. Again, this one's for a month to give me an average of the figures. And when I generate that report, I've got a graph here that would then show me how many calls were queuing for the particular groups in under 1 minute, 1 to 5 minutes, 5 to 10 minutes, or how many calls had to wait over 10 minutes before it was answered in the queue. Once you've got the data from the reports console and you know how many people you're going to need to answer the calls, to change the members within the groups, you would need to go to the service delivery console. So up at the top of the screen, you're going to have the 5 menus up at the top once you've accessed the service delivery. And remember, you can use the menu to go directly from the reports console to the service delivery console if you need to. If you then click on groups at the top of the page, that will take you into the group list. And then to manage these groups, you just need to click on the blue pen next to the group that you want to change. So if you know that you've got quite a lot of your reception team off and you're going to need extra cover in that appointments team, you can click on the blue pen and you can then add extra members into the group so that they're able to answer those appointment calls for you. If you click on the drop down on the end, you will then have a list of users that are in the practice and set up on the system, but not currently in that group. So it won't let you add the same person twice to a group. And you can either click on the name through the list, Or if you start typing in the name in the box at the top, it will then reduce the list so that you've just got that one user. You can then click on the user's name to add them into the team members there. If you need to remove anybody from this list, so if you don't want them to be able to answer those calls at all, you can just click on the red cross just next to their name, and that will remove that user from that group, which will mean that they won't be able to take those calls until they're added back into the group through the service delivery console there. Any changes you make, click on the green tick to save those changes, and then you'll get a little success or failure message up at the top of the screen that will tell you whether that's been saved successfully. Once you've added the members, you've got a couple of options as to how you then make them active for calls at any particular point. The first one that we're going to have a look at is our auto step in. Oh, sorry, you can also copy the group members. So if it is the same people in different teams, you can copy the group members rather than having to add the different members to each team. So if you click on the grey person next to the group you want to copy the members into, that will then offer you a list of the groups. You can then select the group from the drop-down menu that you want to copy the members from. And then when you click on Save Group, it will add exactly the same people into the new group for you as well. Again, you'll get a success or failure message up at the top of the screen there. So you've got a couple of options to add people into the actual active members within the group. Once they're a member of the group, they don't have to be taking those calls all of the time. The first option that we're going to look at is the automatic option, which is auto step in. This is accessed in the configuration console, and you can set parameters for a user to automatically add that user to a group so that they can then start answering calls if the queues reach a particular level. You can access the configuration console either through the single sign-on using the configuration console application option, or via the menu using the 3 lines just next to your initials. Once you're in the configuration console, you'll need to click on the groups option, and the menus will be down the left-hand side in the configuration console. That will then give you a list of all your groups where you can either search for the group name, or you can just scroll through the list and then click on the pen next to the group that you want to change. So I'm editing the appointments group here, and to change the group members for auto step in, I need to click on the members tab for that group. That will then give you a list of all the members within the group. Well, actually, it'll give you a list of all the users. You'll be able to see whether that user is a member of this particular group because the member will be active. And although you're a member of the group, you don't have to be actively taking those calls. So we can see Adam here in our table is a member of the appointments group, but he's not currently active to take calls. Now, if I wanted Adam to be automatically stepped in, I can click on the auto step in icon here, and that will then add him to the list at the top of that member screen where you can then set the parameters. So I've added Ian here. We can see now that he's in red because he's got no parameters set. So on this auto step in list, you can now set the parameters for each individual user. So you could have a user coming in when this queue reaches 10 people, or when people have been waiting for more than 2 minutes here, as is shown on Clara's example. And I can fill in different details for each user. So you can do a staggered approach to helping cover over those holiday periods by bringing extra people in when the queue reaches those particular parameters. You can also do that manually through the user console using group management. So rather than using the auto step in, if you want to be more flexible about when people are covering particular queues, or if they need to be in the queue all of the time, even if there's no calls queuing to cover that particular person, then you can use the group management section through the user console. Now, individual users can click on their initials in the top right-hand corner, and that will then bring up the user profile. As a supervisor, you can actually click on any of the names within your user console, and that will then bring up their user profile on the screen, and you can manage this for them, or they can do it themselves if you give them the access there. So with a single user as group management, you can see here the groups that I'm a member of are appointments and physiotherapy. If I wanted to step out of a particular group, I can untick the group that I don't want to be a member of. So I've unticked the appointments group here, and Jack's name has now been removed from the active members in that appointments team. Now that's how you would see anybody with auto step in. If you'd set auto step in for that user, it would then automatically step them into the group when the parameters are met. However, you can do that manually just by putting the tick next to the group that you want them to take the calls for. That will then add their name back into the group so that they're then an active member, and the system's then looking to place the calls to that particular person. You can do that for any of the users. So just by clicking on the name of the user, it will bring up their profile. So again, I can then just untick the group that I don't want that user to be a member of. That will take them out of the group and they won't take those calls. And then when I need them to take the calls, I can then click on them again and put the tick back into the group I want, and that will then add them back into the group within the active members on your user console there. So during this session, we've looked at how you can access the reports console and run the call reports and group reports that will show you your average call handling times and how long callers have to wait in the queues. You can also manage the groups. So we've looked at adding members into the group so you've got extra cover there, and how you can make those members active by using either auto step in or by using the group management there.